Okay, welcome everybody. As I said, Starlink is off the ground and it's under what they call a beta test phase, which means people are actually using it in North America. And we'll go into that a little bit more. Now, this project, again, is one of those which Elon Musk is pursuing. And the last lecture, we talked about Elon Musk's other projects, which I'll follow, which concerned the the Tesla cars, which I talked about, and the SpaceX, which is this aerospace area. And today it's the telecommunication area we're talking about. And there are about 4 or 5 others, which I'll continue with my subsequent talks. But today we're going to be focusing on this one, and this one covers Starlink. It's the space internet, if you like, which is going to be a game changer. So what are we going to be talking about today? Essentially, Starlink, we're going to ask the question, why is Starlink required? And then go on to look at it, see what it is actually, how it's put together, and why it is so important. So much so that it's a game changer for the world, as it were. And it's now already in a testing phase. A few thousand people are connected, and they're undergoing, and that's happened last week. And then we look at and see what the cost is and how much it is to have that service available. Okay, so off we go. Now I saw that, okay, here. Now what I'm looking at here in terms of communication is the Starlink. It's a project that has come about because one is able to put up into space a number of satellites, which wasn't possible before, because satellites are very expensive business to put up. And what we have today are these things called geocentric, which are very high up in orbit, something like 20,000 or plus miles above the surface of Earth. And they need to be high because they are stationary and they cover a large part of the Earth in terms of their coverage. But the downside of that, okay, I'm going to sort of just go to that and mute everybody so that we don't have any disturbances coming through. Okay, so as I was saying, the geocentric satellites are very high up, and although they cover a large area of space, or area on Earth for transmitting the signals to, the problem is, of course, one of what they call latency, and we heard that term defined in my earlier lectures as to what it is, what we mean by latency. It's the time taken to go, the signal to go from the Earth to the satellite and back again. And that is the type of thing that we see when we look at some of these radio or TV interviews of people across the world. When they ask the question, of course, there is a delay and the other person then waits before answering. So that's latency. And I'll show you a bit more detail on that later on. Now, one of the principles of, I'm going to sort of put that thing in here like that. Let's come back to Starlink and why Elon Musk has been successful when others have not ventured into that territory. Now, we know that from the first talk that we did a couple of weeks ago, that was on aerospace, and he's got these reusable rockets. And because they're reusable rockets, they can put up satellites at a vastly reduced cost. So the satellites then become really affordable for commercial purposes by putting many of them. Now, why do we want to put many of them? The reason is that if they are in a low orbit, then that latency is much reduced. Rather than having 600, 700 milliseconds, we are down to about 30, 40 milliseconds latency, which means it's like instantaneous communication. So with this technology, and even if the person is right across the other side of the world, it'll be like you talking to them instantaneously without having to wait for the delay. Now, one of the things about the low Earth orbit satellites is that they cover a small area of Earth, and therefore you have to have many more whizzing around in their orbits, so that they cover the whole area of Earth. And that's the principle. So Elon Musk's idea is that Musk innovation, mindset, the way he works, he says, we know about this, so the average project seems to revolve around a set of principles, he says. He has taken an old idea, which is, satellite communication, but because of lackluster technology, um, it hasn't really sort of succeeded too well. And he says we can take that technology and put the best engineers at work, and they'll come up with better solutions. And that's what he is doing by basically bringing the satellites to a point where it becomes commercially viable and technically feasible. And of course, the costs are going to be, quite big in terms of what it can generate by way of revenues and so on, because he's going to be talking about connecting to the whole world. So this is the basic idea, is that take the old technology, put some good thinking behind it and brains behind it, and I come up with innovative solutions, which is what he does for all his other projects as well. Okay, so what is a Starlink? The project is about $10 billion thing there, because we need thousands of satellites in space, in orbit. At the first go, I think they're talking about putting 12,000, and subsequently up to about 42,000 in all. And right now, where we are, because the beta tests have started, is that we've got nearly 1,000 orbiting already. So this Starlink is to provide high-speed internet to everyone. Now, when he says everyone, we're talking about people who are not living in the cities, because we already have access through our service providers and so on, telcos, as they call them, the telephone companies. But he's much more focused on those areas which don't have these connectivity. Especially if you go to some of the poorer parts of the world, or onto the countryside, even in America or in Europe, there is no sort of access to internet, or if there is, it's very expensive or quite erratic. So what we have here is really the availability of this service to practically everybody in the world, no matter where they are, especially those who are outside the cities. Now, he's also making a statement here which says it's not like Starlink is a huge threat to telcos. The telcos, as you know, that when I link up my internet through BT or Virgin, I always sort of swear under my breath because the service is not very great. But Starlink promises to outdo all of them, and we'll see how. So let's move on. Now, this is a bunch of these satellites stacked together, which are in fact going to be loaded into a Falcon rocket, and then when they reach a certain height, they are released, and they then find their orbits. So we'll go into a bit more of that. Okay, here's a good question that we can also ask. How is Starlink different? Because we've got a lot of these other people who are in the game, but they haven't really delivered really uh, for that access to be sufficiently widely accepted or widely used. Because they don't have the rockets to put up so many satellites. And secondly, the technology is not as advanced as the one that Starlink has developed. So in which other ways are they sort of really different cost-wise? Now, cost-wise, simply because the SpaceX, which is the mother company of Starlink, now they are still not in the stock market as yet. No, so Starlink is not in the stock market, but Tesla is. So sooner or later, Starlink will be spun off from SpaceX to be made into an IPO. That's the offering for the stock market, so people like you and me can buy the shares in that. Anyway, the cost is low because of the reusable rockets. Yeah. Now, the other thing is, of course, which is different from these companies that are offering the similar type of service, which is not very, it's very localized, is the speed. Now, this satellite Starlink technology gives you very high speeds, up to 1 GB. Now, the other companies are offering something like 25 MB. So here we're talking about 40 times better. And latency, of course, so the time that takes the signal to go and come back. So we have in Starlink instantaneous communication, regardless of which part of the world you're going to be communicating with, because this 20 millisecond type of latency is excellent, whereas compared to the 600 which the other people are offering, like GeoSat. Now, this is a deployment. At the moment, if you look at the world, not too many areas of the world have much of coverage. So it's just a little indication to show that even in advanced countries here, it's not full coverage available. And of course, in poorer countries like South America and Asia, it's like 1 or 2% here. Africa, 1%. But Starlink will sort of immediately be able to give that coverage to all this area of the world. Now, this is what a satellite looks like. See, we saw a bunch of them earlier on, but this one here is just opened up. Its antenna, the solar cells are opened up, and these red lines here are its laser communication it does with other satellites. That's how it sort of, provides the connectivity in orbit, so it covers the globe. Yeah, here we are, another picture of that satellite. It gets powered by the solar cells, so it doesn't have to have lots of batteries on board, and it's quite reasonably cost as well. The cost is very low compared to the thousands and thousands which used to be the case before. Now, this is giving you an access about connectivity here, internet, percentage of internet access by country. And you can see the disparity is quite big. The blue areas are somewhat covered, but all the other are less, they're not covered at all. So you could say that half the people of the earth don't have connectivity. And well, it's something that I thought it's interesting, because this is a measure of how much data we are going to be pushing through these wires of ours or through internet. The traffic on internet can be measured in terms of these figures here called gigabyte. Here, gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes. So we are talking about fair amount of data, and then if you keep on going up, this is the terabyte, the petabit, and exabit, and zetabit. So you can see a humongous amount of increase is going to be there in the future for internet to carry. And this capacity that you can build into Starlink will be there to sort of satisfy a lot of that. Now here just a pictorial thing about what is meant by latency. The signal from the Earth goes to the satellite and comes back. Here it's showing about 2 seconds, if you like, 2 milliseconds rather. And these are at low orbit, about 500 kilometers up, compared to the 33,000 kilometers, which is the geosat that we have at the moment. Now, this is a picture of how the Starlink network looks like orbiting around the Earth. And each one of these things is moving fairly fast, going around and round in their orbit. And while they're moving from their position, they're in communication with each other around them. So that once they pass over a certain area, then the next one satellite that comes in to cover that area, that signal is sent to that so that it picks up. So there's a continuous traffic between these satellites in order to maintain uninterrupted service for the user down below. Okay, at the first go, they're going to be having 12,000, 7,500 at this very low orbit, which is 340 kilometers above the surface of Earth. And the next level is about 1,200 kilometers. Even these are very, very low Earth orbits. And this number they hope to sort of put into place by 2027. So another 4 or 5 years, they'll be able to do that. Because there's so many in number, and each rocket that sort of carries these satellites up at the present moment, the Falcon the Falcon sort of rocket I talked about, you remember, on the SpaceX a couple of weeks ago, they carry only about 60 satellites at each launch, and they have 2 launches per month. Therefore, they've been doing that. Now that the figure is about 900 so far, they started doing that a few months ago, so that they have that. But sooner or later, they're going to have the Starship coming in, which is undergoing some tests at the moment. And once the Starship is available, they can be putting up to about 400 satellites at each launch, which means that the 12,000 will be reached by about in the next 4 or 5 years. That's what they're saying, depending on how many launches they have per month. And currently, they're planning about 2. Yeah, this is the right now. What we've got is a satellite which is quite high up, which is about 35,000 kilometers up, and the latency is calculated this way: the height divided by the speed of light, and that's the latency. That's the delay you get. Yeah, we are. That's another thing. But if in the low Earth orbit, if it's only 340 kilometers, you can see the latency is down to about 3 milliseconds. Yeah. So that's another picture of these. This is a geocentric, which is very high up, 35,000 kilometers. This is the low Earth orbit, and these are the medium one. And these are the ones that medium and the low Earth is what Starlink is being is going to be working at that level. That's showing you another picture of this geocentric. When the Earth turns, this thing turns with it, which means it's geostationary. So it constantly sort of has a footprint on Earth, which it can beam to and receive the signals up and down. But for it to be sort of stationary at the same point on Earth, it needs to be at that sort of height, which is 35,000 kilometers. Okay, now one other thing about these, once these satellites are in orbit, the individual users will have a satellite to catch the signal from these satellites. And that satellite can connect, so that dish can connect to your computer directly. So you have your computer, you connect it to the dish, and the dish then connects to the satellite, and you get the path sort of working. Now, one of the other things that the Starlink project is also talking about is they're going to have what they call the Earth stations. That means that they can bunch up, if you like, if you've got a lot of scattered users all over the country, they can have one, uh, especially in the city, they can have one big station and they can have a lot of traffic going through that. And then it can also connect through the line, the wires, optic fiber, whatever it may be, which is the current way of connecting to our homes for the moment. So they'll be able to connect into that network as well. This is an Earth station, and they're applying to get about 1 million of them to be approved. They'll have them all scattered all over. There's another picture of the satellites. This is all the low Earth orbit satellites. Another picture of basically showing how these satellites are going to be connecting to each other for signaling. Now, in a moving diagram, this thing will be moving, that will be moving, and that path, the red paths will move with them and will change its configuration depending on which satellite is closest. Okay, some person asked Elon Musk, this is, when are you going to sort of put this up so that the stock market, we can start buying shares? So he said he's going to do that soon, but he said not very quickly, because he says, I want the revenues from this Starlink to come in at a steady pace before I put it up in the market. And of course, a lot of people are very excited about the fact that they want to buy into the Starlink project. And of course, there are a lot of small people, small investors. And he says all those who already have invested in Tesla or in some of the other projects that he's got, they're going to get some little partial treatment or favorable treatment. So he says you can hold me to that. So a lot of people are very happy with that they won't be excluded once the market starts to sort of have the Starlink for buying and selling shares. Right, at the moment we've got only 3 satellite-based ISPs. One is Hughes, the other one is Viasat, and the third one is SpaceX. Now these are the ones that are doing the geocentric ones. That's the same one. Yeah, you can see the additional information here is that you've got a latency which is quite high, and here in this case it's instantaneous. Now this is, I thought, I always am fascinated by this picture, because this is the booster rockets that are coming back after putting the satellite launcher in orbit, and so they'll come back and they'll get reused. So they come back and sit on these pads to be reused. That's why the cost of launching is so low. Now, what are the economics of the Starlink? They expect something like 30 billion annual revenues. We'll look at what they're going to be charging soon, but it seems to me that they're looking at a vast number of people coming on board, especially when half the world is unconnected. The potential is humongous. So on that basis, 30 billion revenue, which means you're going to have this sort of gross profit, and then you've got this annual profit of this much, which means that company will become humongously valuable. That's another picture of that, again, those satellites there. Another picture of how it looks once they're... and one of the other things here is that these laser interlinks are nearly unjammable and also uninterceptable, which means the security is quite enormous. You can't hack into this easily or interrupt them too easily, because they're built in a lot of redundancy. Even if a satellite goes down, then immediately, the neighboring satellites will sort of share their information straight away, so they don't let the users down below get affected in any way. So immediate sort of redundancy could be used there, if the satellite fails. Now, this is how the signal actually goes. Here you're on the Earth. Here, this is the Earth, and this is the Starlink satellites, and this is what the Earth station here in this case. It's connecting to the satellites, and the signal is switched from one satellite to another until it reaches the destination. Here's another station here, and it reaches there. Now, how fast this can go is again at the speed of basically light. At the moment, we have a measure called the speed of light, which is about 300,000 kilometers per second in vacuum. But in optic fiber, it's a lot less. It's about 20% less, I think, in speed. So if you have an optic fiber connecting, the computers, it is not at the same speed of light as in vacuum. But here, this connectivity is faster than the optical fiber, if you like, because this is considered to be space. So the signal will travel at this 300,000 kilometers per second. So now, who are some of the people? There are going to be people who are going to be like military will be using it, governments will be using it, shipping, crew, aviation. So think of it, they'll all be relying on this because it is such a fantastically connected system, and with the speeds and latency so low, with the speeds high and the latency so low, there's nothing in the market like that. Now, for the tests that are underway for the beta testing, these are the cities or the states that are undergoing right now. Last week, they were connected up. They're in this little latitude of 46 to 43, that sort of band. That's basically North of North America on the border of Canada. Canada is also possible, but they haven't given approval as yet. They're waiting for that. Now, this is one of the tests that was done at the guy who started to using the Starlink. He's in that area, and he has a current service which gives him 100 megabits per second and a latency of 37. So it's with the optic fibers from the local ISP. I have at my flat something like about 60 or 70 MB, download speed. The latency is also quite of this order. It's not too bad. Upload is a bit slow. So that is the current systems that we have in the cities. Of course, this is not available in the countryside because there's no connection there at all. So what we have in comparison to that is what Starlink is going to be giving, which is a download speed of 140, 150 thereabouts, compared to the 109, 10 there. Uploads of 20 compared to 8 here. And of course, when they say there's a ping is the same thing as latency, which is 30 MB, so that's even better than that one. So you can see immediate sort of tests have yielded for the common user a very, very acceptable service already. It also has this equipment that you buy to get yourself started. And one of the equipment is the dish, and that dish apparently, because it's out in the open, if it gets too cold, it will heat itself up to melt any ice on it. So you can see they've thought of lots of things to maintain, a good continuity of service. Yeah, this is again same sort of picture, but that's the sort of we'll come down to that again. Okay, this is the cost of a user who connects to it. As I said to you my last lecture, I did also apply to connect, but they didn't have the service for UK as yet. But they did note down the people who have applied because they want to know what sort of demand there is. And if you're in that current area at the moment, which is north of all the southern states of Canada in USA. So you pay $100 per month, and the equipment to start up is so much, $500, and to mount it you have to pay so much. And the speeds are about, as I said, 150 megabits, and latency 2240. So you can see it's a very, very good. And sorry, this is the dish that you have to buy, that comes with the equipment for $500, along with the router and the connectivity, the wires and so on. Now this is just something I put up so that to show that this is the test that results that have come through already, and they're giving a very, very good sort of responses here. Let me move this thing out. Okay. So in Seattle at the moment they're getting 100 MB, 40 latency. That's in July, and they've got all these cities down there, which are all up there in the north. They're advertising, of course, in the papers as well. For $99, you can, even if you're sitting in the countryside, you can avail this service. That's the rocket that, this is the top bit, which carries the satellites. That's the one that opens up when it reaches that height of about 300 or 400 kilometers up. And this launching launcher comes back and sits back on the, it's reusable. So it comes back. We showed you pictures. That's all the satellites being lumped together so they can be carried upstairs, carried in that rocket here. Now this is an Earth station, and this is the individual, homes that can have a little dish, and these Earth stations can sort of deal with a lot more traffic from the satellite, and your home can also connect to this through hardwire. So if you've got hard wiring at the moment to your, say, Virgin or Sky or BT, you can continue with that if you like, but you can still have this dish in order to connect to the satellite and avail that. And this is for the higher traffic regions so that they can all have that service available to them. That's the type of equipment that's going to come for that $500. So it's a pretty small thing. And this is the satellite you can put up on your rooftop. Sorry, not satellite, but rather dish. But here you can note that your dish has got to be having line of vision which is clear. Here you can see it's blocked by these buildings, so you can't. So you need to adjust your dish in such a way that you have a clear, line of sight to the sky. Here the trees are blocking it. So you need to have something like that. Okay, I thought I put this one up, which is rather interesting because these are the agreement you have to sign with Starlink. Now, this is the usual stuff about all that, but I think the interesting thing here, which I saw, was that it says over here, for services provided on Mars or on transit to Mars via Starship or colonization space, the parties recognize Mars as a free planet and that no Earth-based government has authority or sovereignty over Martian activities. So accordingly, disputes will be settled by self-governing principles established in good faith at the time of Martian. So he's also looking ahead to see, once the rockets are available for going up, the Starship to Mars. Once you get to Mars, you're going to have, Mars. No single government on Earth is going to start saying, well, this is ours. So he says we're not going to recognize anybody. There's going to be no earthly government authority there, which I think is very good. And you have to sign this once you connect to Starlink. Now, I thought, why would one want to sort of sign this? I would sort of quite happily sign this. Essentially, they're trying to establish how much support they have on Earth for this concept of having, these incompetent governments in Mars. Again, like they're destroying the Earth here, they might also destroy the Mars as well. So he wants to keep them out, which I think is a grand idea. Okay, that's all for the moment. We can talk about it a little. I'll stop the share. We'll go in for Q&A. Right, here we go. I'm going to put it on to gallery view. There we are. Okay. So that's chance for you to ask questions. Yes, Nimi, off the ground, like a shot.
I'm not a fan of Elon Musk as you are. I have reservations about him. Now, my reasons are varied, but he started Tesla, which was a brilliant thing. And, the value of his company has gone up hugely. But the cars he's producing are still not reliable. The battery is still not great. If you want to buy one, you have to queue up for ages. So he hasn't really got that sorted completely. And then he's onto all these hugely difficult new ventures, because he obviously has watched a lot of Star Trek and Star Wars and loves it all. But it seems to me, so even with this now, what I'm thinking, I read just a little bit, and it said there are issues about light pollution and space debris. With the light pollution, the effect of all these satellites on the stars as they exist and how they clash with astronomy as we've always had it in the past and sciences. So there is clearly some problem there. And then space debris, if you've got so much stuff going on, goodness knows what's going to bash into what. So it's not as if it's a smooth thing, which is going to be amazing for all of us. I don't think it is. But what I want to ask you is this. So where does all this go with climate change? What is the effect, if any? Is it positive, negative, or none? Besides all the things that he's putting in his farms.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I think those are legitimate concerns that have been raised by professional bodies as well, like the astronomers. They have said that with so many satellites, our vision of the space is going to be affected because of light sort of reflecting on this. So they immediately got to work on it, and they've made it into dark sort of satellites, so there's no light interference coming in. Regarding your point about debris, now the FCC has very strict rules as to how you can put your satellites up in order not to create a debris in the future. Because already there's so much debris over there because of loose sort of technology and regulations before, but now they are very tightened up quite a lot. And what these Starlink satellites do is that they have their own power drives, power sort of engines, which will, first of all, get them to navigate to be in the right position in their orbit. But once their life is over, which is after 5 years, they will be able to come. They will be able to come down to an orbit of what I call the dispersal. Not dispersal, but the I can't find the word for it. But an orbit from which point they start to disintegrate. And 95% of that matter gets disintegrated. Only about 5% is left, which will come down as debris and will come down on Earth. There won't be anything on space. The third point is, we talked about Starship in our last lecture, in or one before that. The Starship is also now gearing up because it can carry a heavy load, like 100 tons, even to the moon or to Mars. They are going to deploy them to pick up all this debris that is circling around the Earth at the moment. So there is that project also underway, which I think is very commendable. So you can see that these people who are working at it, brilliant minds and brilliant engineers, led by Elon Musk, they are solving the problems as they appear.
So what
And
about Tesla though? So that was the first one, a really good positive thing. Everyone loved it. I don't know how long it's been going, but he hasn't really sorted that out and he's on to these next massive projects. And you think, well, why not take it one at a time and perfect it first so we have more confidence? Because personally, if I'd bought, I wouldn't go on to get a subscription to Starlink because I wouldn't be 100% confident that it's going to be as good as it should be, as Tesla isn't as good as it should be.
well, I mean, you see, all these technologies, they are sort of evolving as time goes by. And what he's done for the first time, in a way, he's undertaken some big projects which haven't really been addressed, the issues. And the few countries that have immense sort of budgets, they have been able to do that previously. But now, with a much more innovative and smarter sort of mindset, and with goals which I think are very universal, he is now, in terms of, you mentioned the climate impact, right? Now with the Tesla batteries, I think the whole fossil industry is now on its knees now because of the battery and the electric cars. So you can see already he's taken the whole world to a point where something reasonable is coming out.
Yes, it is, but my point is that yes, this is why I say Tesla to me was a brilliant thing, but the battery issue and the unreliability still goes on. And you mentioned a few weeks ago that it was, what was it, the million-mile battery or whatever, and then that turned out to be a bit of a damp squib. It didn't actually materialize. So it seems to me he's not thorough. He has these amazing ideas which are larger than life, and he starts off very excited, like a child, and then abandons it halfway through and wanders off to the next Star Trek project or whatever.
Well, let me say something about the battery. The million-mile battery that he has promised is already there. They're talking about a 2 million-mile battery now. Because you see, the last battery day that took place about in September, I think it was, end of September, he approached the whole issue of innovation in all these areas in a manner which the press didn't really pick up on with much sort of insight. Later on, as time went by, they started to see that what he was showing by way of innovation and an incremental sort of improvement that was stated as percentages is leading a path to a path that will deliver on all his promises there. See? So it is not just talk, it is talk based on very well put together scientific, if you like, attempts to deliver on his promises. And he's making pretty good headway.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very encouraged by that.
And what about the impact of the Starlink on climate change? Anything or not? I don't
There
know.
is hardly any. In fact, you see the rockets that take up these satellites, there are 2 rockets fired every month. They use oxygen and methane. So they're not going to be very pollutant. They're not like the cars belching out, the carbon dioxide. So as far as climate impact on that is concerned, is very minimal, if at all. I haven't come across any mention of that at all by anybody. Yeah, June.
All these satellites hurtling in their orbits, are they not going to interfere with rockets exploring and trying to settle on Mars and other planets? we have on our roads traffic of cars. We have accidents, they collide. How is this going to be avoided where you have so many extra satellites and extra rockets going to explore different parts of space? How are
Yeah.
you going to avoid collisions?
Yeah, these satellites, they have their own motive power, and they can be, they will be avoiding any particular thing that comes in their way. If some for malfunction happens, they can sort of move around a little bit, and that's how they work. So in terms of the density of satellites in the atmosphere, although the numbers seem very high, but the Earth is huge. And the space in between the two satellites is also quite enormous. And if you look at any of the space shots that we've seen, within a matter of minutes, you cross the height. So there is no sort of congestion that is there. So as far as I haven't seen any issue that has been raised of that type that is of concern. Yeah, Jim.
Can I?
Oh, it's okay.
Can I
Giselle.
ask? I was.
Sorry, was it Giselle? Okay, Jim, I'll come to you.
Yeah.
Giselle.
I just wanted to ask. To what extent can you clarify to what extent we could actually live on Mars? Because as I understand it, there's almost no oxygen to breathe. The radiation would be absolutely huge if we were to be on Mars, and the air pressure is a big problem. So does Elon Musk does he envisage us living on Mars? What is his plan? I mean, I can't see how we can possibly live there unless we build sort of bubbles to live in and sort of walk on there in these massive spacesuits. What's the plan?
Yeah, well, it's a colony that he's got in mind, which is all enclosed, so that you're not exposed to the elements of Mars in that sense, because there's very little air. So you will be living in these type of igloo-like, if you like, habitations, which are going to be interconnected. I think I showed you a picture of that. It's quite an extensive little area where everything is connected to each other. So you can move from one bubble to another, so on, all interconnected. So in that sense, you are protected. Now, as far as water is concerned, they feel that they might be able to make these type of things there with the technology that we have. As far as the fuel, in order to return the rockets back, they also have enough carbon dioxide in the air, which will then be able to produce the type of oxygen cum methane type of fuel which the rocket requires to come back to Earth. So they have worked out how you can survive there. But the central question is, do human beings want to be just earthbound all the time, or should we also be having a presence elsewhere? Because in case there is some disaster that strikes Earth, like if you have a madman pressing the button, that could sort of finish humankind. Like the dinosaurs disappeared, humankind can also disappear. So this ensures, if you like, the continuity of the human beings. Yeah, Jim.
It's just that I was thinking that if we're going to live in a sort of bubble in these buildings, we may as well go to somewhere like Central Africa and build these bubbles in a jungle there where we won't need as much. At least we won't be in danger of the radiation so much. We would at least have oxygen to breathe. And although the temperatures might be very high around the equator in the jungle, you wouldn't be needing as many resources to build, to live there.
Well, the idea is that the African jungle might not exist.
Yeah.
Okay, Jim.
That was just the question about why the projects are failing. like you mentioned Tesla, you know, this type of thing, because he has a different approach. He has a systems approach, which is to, before you start the project, he knows there's going to be things which you'll only know in hindsight.
Yeah.
So what he does is he tries it on a small scale. It's a classic systems approach, basically, or project approach. It's a classic. So you say, we know it's going to be complex. We'll try it on a small scale, and we know we're going to fail in certain things. But by doing that, we get a competitive advantage over everybody else. So you start off with complexity, effectively, rather than, how can I explain it? If you're going to do, you know, a ridiculous example, if you had a problem with your plumbing in your house, you know you can't handle it. It's complicated. We'll get the best expert. We know we're going to get a solution. He said he doesn't know the answer. It's only going to be in hindsight. He'll know all the answers to Tesla and all the other things. But the key thing is to start with the complexity, and that's where he's coming from. And one question I wanted to ask is, how does China fit in with this? How will they fit in? Because when you mentioned China, you said that they're poor countries and they haven't got much coverage. I think that was on the chart, a low percentage coverage.
Yeah.
But how will they feel about it? Because there's a big war, a power war going to be going on, I think, between China and the West.
Yeah.
That's the question I wanted to, and I think that's what may be behind it. He wants to get started.
Yeah, I feel that in terms of having to use Starlink, any part of the world, I think is not going to be stopped by anybody, because it is essentially giving to the country an enormous amount of infrastructure reduction cost. Because if they were to put that infrastructure in place in their country, first of all, they wouldn't have enough money to lay all the lines all over the country. For instance, say, take China, for instance. You know, it's a big country. To put all the wires in the ground and be able to deliver those services to the remote areas, or for that matter, even Africa, they can't afford to do that. So all these countries would look upon it very favorably that you have an infrastructure that is uh, giving to them at a very, very low cost, and that would help the people enormously in being able to connect to the world. Now, how much of a connection they want to try and censor some stuff or the other, that they're doing anyway today, and they can do it even tomorrow, you know, with the Starlink.
Okay. It's just really the global power struggle. You know, I just wondered if China are going to do their own projects. You know, to try.
Oh, I think China is already embarking on its own projects, because, you know, when they were kept out of the International Space Station, they devised one themselves, and they put up one. So they've got a little space station, I think, which is under their control, which they will be able to do experiments on. And they also have their launch capability. They have sent landers to the moon as well, even to the other side of the moon, so that their technology is coming in very fast. You see, this principle of sanctions has not worked really, because if you look at even in the political sense, look at Iran. When the sanctions were put in, although Obama had enough of a sense to be able to come to an agreement with Iran, but with Trump, he's put sanctions, and what that has done is that Iran has now become like a partner to China, with China investing $400 billion for its infrastructure and for all the other things that they have made an agreement on. So China, in fact, is one of those countries that is providing an alternate to some of the sanction regimes and all that. And the poor countries who are being helped, I think they have a partner in China. So China is forging ahead, even in technology. There's a question coming up as to how much longer can the West retain their technological advance, and that question is popping up quite often, because a lot of areas are sort of lagging behind. Like even the case of Huawei, the 5G, so they're so far ahead in China that we still have about 2 years to catch up, you know, in any part of the West.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Ruth.
Is there some regulating agency for the whole world? Because space is now a new, it's like a new domain. So I mean, it sounds like what he's trying to do when he said that about Mars is he's trying to be in charge of the next domain.
He wants to be the ruler of Mars. Well,
Yeah.
I think what he's simply saying is that there should be, a different way of thinking when it comes to Mars. It'll be a little colony to begin with, but it has to be maintained in such a way that there's no politics gets into it, so
Yes.
as to spoil the whole thing.
Does he come up against any kind of regulator?
At the moment, I'm not sure about how much of his technology is freely available to every country, but this is a commercial company, so they're not going to be giving out their technology to any other country. But I think once the technology has developed, I think the other countries can sort of learn from it quite quickly and catch up. As far as having international agreements, I think one can have them, because we've seen that after the Second World War, we did have an international agreement. The New World Order was created at that time, Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, the Security Council, UN, so on. So people come together at some point in time to try and, hammer out, a common approach to things. I think they will also do that for international things. It hasn't happened for the North Pole, for instance, at the moment. The North Pole is still struggling because each one is trying to grab a little piece of resource that is under the North Pole. The stronger ones try to grab something, and what we need is really some sensible approach. And I think that's why he's a little bit concerned that if you bring the same type of, disagreements into Mars, we are going to sort of really, not make much progress with all the technology that he's delivering. So there is an opportunity, I think, to get together, talk about it. You just have to do it. But if you get a stray person like that coming into power like Trump, then it's difficult. But now Biden very much there in the pipeline to come in. I think he might bring a bit of a calmer USA and more sensible USA, to deal with world problems. Yeah, Pam.
When do you think roughly we'll get it in the UK?
Well, by 2027, they say all 12,000 of these satellites will be in low orbit. Mm-hmm. And London, I think, is also, I think very soon, maybe next year, they might extend the beta phase to London also. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. I'm hoping very much that this sort of service comes, because I hate my service provider. The Virgin I hate most.
Yes, yeah. Awful, yeah.
Yeah, Ruth.
I don't believe him that he says he's just trying to connect the places that can't be connected. I mean, it's obvious that once this starts, the whole world will connect to Starlink.
You see, what he's trying to deliver is the technology, and the countries that are wanting to avail that service will have to give the permission for that service to be available in the country. Like Canada right now, they are able to, if they, they're very close to the beta region, the top countries, in the top states of USA, they are the beta sort of regions. And Canada can also be part of that because the signals are getting there. But the Canada has not as yet given them permission. So once they give permission, that thing service can start there as well. I don't think governments are going to sort of hesitate on this front, because it is like giving them a gift, you know, to their people all of a sudden. And governments can save enormous amounts of money on infrastructure that would otherwise be necessary to lay down, you know, physical infrastructure.
Maybe we get a decent track and trace system going if we had this.
Well, I think we have, I think, a problem on that count, because people are not too keen on being tracked.
No.
Yeah, well, that goes back to the whole question of ID cards. If we'd had ID cards, the whole thing would have been much easier. In this country, they're so frightened of ID cards, you know, allowing, you know, your private life, your privacy. And really, I've lived in other countries where there's ID cards. It makes things a lot simpler.
ID cards, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Imagine if we had ID cards, the track and trace would be so much easier, because that's what's being used in other countries.
Yeah. In any event, even without the ID cards, I think we are all identifiable, because I think our faces are now having that technology that recognizes you, you know. So wherever you are, they just have to sort of appear on a camera and they know who you are.
Well, they would find you. They would find your address for a start.
Well, if they know your face, they can find the address very easily.
Well, that hasn't quite come into being yet, has it?
Well, they have to look at the passport picture, which they have hold a lot of information, and they compare the picture and they'll have the address.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing about it, because if you don't have a passport, then people in this country don't have any ID, unless they, you know, a lot of them don't even have birth certificates. This has been a lot in my work, because when I ask people for ID, they can't produce any. If I say, do you have a passport? There's a lot of people who don't have a passport, and therefore they have no ID.
Yeah, I know this is one of the problems that was there in India about 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, when they decided to bring in the ID card. And immediately when they brought in the ID card, they were very sensible. The guy who made it was a very good computer scientist. They just held the data, which was nothing to do with race, nothing to do with religion, nothing to do except your biometric data. Basically saying, Mr. Siddiqui you are him. That's right. Basically to say who you are. So they have your fingerprints, your eyes, and your face, and that's all. Then all the other people can check with reference to that database whether you are who you say you are. So then the banks would keep your address, and then the hospitals would keep your medical records. So each of the other bodies would maintain their own records. But the central database, which is your biometric type of data, is without any bias. It's just to identify who you are, that's all. Yeah. And they're very successful with that, because all of a sudden what happened was that about 300 to 400 million people in India became visible. Because of lack of documentation, as you mentioned earlier on, no passport, no birth certificate, no driving license, no nothing. They then all of a sudden, when they heard about this, they went to the bank captured this biometric data, and they became part of that, and the government then started to give them the subsidies that they were entitled to directly into their account. So 300 or 400 people became, a million people became visible, you know, in a short period of time.
That's right. A lot of people are invisible. And nowadays, if someone wants to open a bank account, or in the work that I do, people need to be police checked, a DBS, if they want to do any types of work with children, if they want to foster, if they want to adopt or anything. And there are a lot of people around who don't have a driving license, who don't have a passport. They're stuck. do you know the lengths that we have to go to? I have to ask people for like 5 different household bills, and I have to ask them for like 10, 12 different documents. And even then it doesn't go so well to try to identify who they are. I can't imagine what happens with these people if they want to open up a new bank account.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing about technology. You see, with internet becoming available, people in Africa who probably don't have 90% or 80% of them don't have any documentation. They can then sort of apply straight away to have a phone and a connectivity to internet, and they're able to sort of, you know, carry on some commerce, and they become identifiable as well. So the technology will deliver us a tremendous amount of benefit to society, especially to the poorer countries
It
who
would.
don't have these facilities.
It would. Enormous.
Yeah, that's right. You can give them education through this internet. They can make them learn skills. You see, as in the case of, we're talking about $500 for this little kit that you have to buy, the dish and the router, so that once you point the dish to the sky, you can catch the signal, and then, you know, you're able to connect to internet. So a village can afford to pay $500 and have all the people, you know, feed off that, because, you know, they won't need very high-speed things and all that. They can share. So it becomes very affordable for even the poorest of people to connect and afford internet. So you can see it's such a humongous type of benefit to the whole mankind. That's why I sort of regard, you know, the few people that has delivered. This is for Nimi rather. That he's one of those people who's going to make a difference to the world. Yeah. Okay, George, anything from you?
No, it's very interesting. You know, like, you know, I'm a bit wary about surveillance, though, about ID cards and.
What are you
everything.
frightened of, George?
Huh?
What are you frightened of? If you've got nothing to hide, then what are you frightened of?
Well, it's not a question of nothing to hide. It's a question of who's checking up on people. You know, like who is actually holding all this data on everybody? Who is actually?
George, what if someone is trying to steal your ID and trying to steal your pension or something? They can easily identify if you've got an ID card that this is you or not you. Can this person get the pension? Does that look like you in the picture, or is it a lady looking nothing like you? You know, a lot of really beneficial things. I really don't know what you're frightened of. I've lived a lot of my life in countries with ID cards. It's a big help.
Yeah.
Well, we're all now at a time where technology is going to make, even without ID cards, very, very much part and parcel of an identifiable entity. And they're going to keep a big brother watch on you.
They're already doing that.
But of course, I think we can all sort of, you know, be happy that this technology does have benefit, and let's look at the benefits as well. Okay, so shall we finish on that note?
What do you do next week, Shafiq?
Yeah, next week we'll continue with the Elon Musk projects.
What?
Because they seem to be the answer to today's world, which has such grim prospects, that we need to have a good narrative to be able to look forward to.
What was that project? Because I may have missed one of the lectures you did. What was
Sorry?
that what project was it? Sorry, the
next few projects. There's energy. I want to deal with energy.
Okay, energy.
Next week. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is so crucial and central to all of us. Okay.
I like your
Thank
dog,
you.
George.
Oh yeah, you've got some additional viewers.
Yes, you got 2 new members.
This one is Charlie.
All right.
And the other one is Freddie.
Cute.
Oh,
Oh, he's adorable.
lovely.
Well, Yeah, well, they're not yawning, so they probably is not sort of completely bored.
Elon Musk fans.
That's right. Potential ones. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
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 Mhm.